So you may be asking yourself, why's he got a snorkel on? This movie is about diving with scuba tanks. I'll tell you why. Because if these two ladies were wearing a snorkel, they wouldn't have been deep enough for this movie to be a problem. Welcome everybody to FF Plus. This is your weekly outlet for reviews that are simple, short, and spoiler free. I'm your host, Aaron White, the guy with the mask on his head. That's right. I'm going full cosplay for this review. No, not really. But I did want to have a little fun with it because frankly, this movie doesn't have a ton to talk about. I wanted to spice it up. This is a film that I took on to review simply because it's smaller. I like to give a little bit of attention to indie movies when I can, but also because it's in a genre that I particularly enjoy a lot of the time, which is the single location survival thriller. Let's get into it. This is The Dive from RLJE Films. It stars Louisa Krause and Sophie Lowe. It is directed by Max Erlenwine, and it is written by Erlenwine and Joachim Hayden. Cinematography is by Frank Grebe, music by Volker Bertelmann and Raphael Seyfried, and it is edited by Philip Thomas. It runs 91 minutes and is not rated. What's it about? Two sisters go diving in a beautiful, remote location. One of the sisters is struck by a rock during an unexpected landslide, and she is trapped 28 meters below underwater with dangerously low levels of oxygen and cold temperatures. It is up to her sister to rise to the surface and fight for her life. So the first thing I want to do is give a little bit of praise to the film just for its premise alone. This is a movie about two people who get stuck in an unlikely situation. And as I mentioned, I watch a lot of films of this kind, and they often feature characters who make a decision that is less than desirable, and then things go wrong. I would kind of compare this, for example, to a movie from last year called The Fall, which also stars two females who climb a gigantic tower. It's not smart. It's not safe. They're doing it for Instagram clout in that film, and they end up getting themselves stuck on top of this giant tower, unable to get back down. This is not like that because the girls, other than the fact that they are diving at a remote location, which is completely plausible, honestly, the rock slide is unpredictable. It's something that just randomly happened. It was an accident, bad luck, hit her perfectly, pinned her underneath the water, and now they've got to deal with it. And I just appreciated that because it didn't have characters that immediately got off on the bad foot by doing something in a way that I felt was unrealistic or something that I couldn't be sympathetic for. Now, to heighten the drama of this situation, it is, of course, the sister that is more in control of her emotions and the sister that seems to have more diving experience that gets pinned. It's the one that needs to be told exactly what to do. She's more frantic. She's more emotional, and she is not quite as prepared. That has to get out of the water frequently, back and forth, make these trips, and try to find a way to get her sister that is stuck out of this awful predicament. I think that it works because if you had the sister that was pinned be the one that was actually up on the surface, she probably would have solved this problem a lot sooner, but it doesn't go down quite like that. They also have to deal with an added element of not having communications. So when they do go diving, they're able to speak with each other, which is really wonderful and beneficial to them. So underwater, they can talk. But once the one sister is rising to the surface, they get out of range and they're unable to communicate. And so you go into this kind of dead zone where the person underwater doesn't know what's happening. And let me tell you, this is the tension that I felt in the movie. The few scenes where it's just her and we watch her sister float up to the top and then get out. And then we kind of cut back to the person that's stuck underwater. That's when I felt the most fear and the most worry because I really started to check my own breath and be thankful and grateful for the fact that I could breathe. I think we take it for granted, but when you're down in this situation and you see her trying to calm herself down, trying to slow her breathing and kind of go into this like meditative state, it really reminds you just how harrowing of a situation this would truly be for almost anyone, much less someone who was experienced as a diver. So Drew is the sister that ends up having to come back to the surface and try to find a way to get her sister May unstuck. And Drew faces all sorts of different struggles. Things don't go her way. She's unable to find items that she might need to help pry May loose. The extra tanks that they have are buried in some rocks, and there's a litany of things that she goes through in trying to progressively get a new solution. And I kind of enjoyed this. There was a little bit of problem solving and critical thinking going on. Meanwhile, she's constantly having this breakdown, or she's fighting off this emotional stress of the situation. Her sister's life is entirely in her hands. And I felt that concern and that frustration that she had of not being able to solve it, and it really weighed heavy on me. Even though I don't know that I cared deeply about either character, I do think that the movie was able to convey those emotions properly, and her having to think outside the box and pivot and come up with new ideas was probably the most interesting part of the film. Now, I love a good lean picture. This movie actually gets right into its story. We start off with the girls driving on their trip, singing some songs, talking to each other. And within 6 minutes of runtime, they are in the water. So it goes down really fast. And then we spend the majority of the time with them dealing with the unfortunate situation and trying to find a way out of it. There's a really good atmosphere that is created with her underwater. Like I said, you definitely feel the lack of air. The problem for me is that the tension comes and goes in an infuriating manner. There are a few brief moments where you really start to feel something starting to close in on you, and then it gets boring. This movie is way too boring for being only 90 minutes long. It feels long. You get to the end and you're like, wow, finally it's done. And frankly, not a lot actually happens. There's only so much you can do here in this story when it's a two-person film and one of them is stuck beneath the surface with rocks pinning her to this underwater cave and the other one up on the land. So we go back and forth between them. The one on the land, as I mentioned, she's trying to find different solutions. The one underwater, when we cut to her, it's really boring because she just doesn't have anything to do. She's just waiting. And so, in a attempt to try and lengthen the film and give us a reason to care about that character, what they do is they have her start having flashbacks. And so there is some backstory to the two sisters that is very briefly presented where one of the sisters, Drew, the one that is on the surface, has left and hasn't been around much, even though they take these annual dive trips. And May is, I guess, questioning why that is and wanting her to be present more. It's not fully explained. We start getting flashbacks of them swimming as kids with parents involved. And I don't really quite understand the point of this other than to try and tug on some sentimental heartstrings and be like, oh, these people used to be children, so you should feel really bad for them now because one of them might die. Unfortunately for me, this whole dynamic really sort of sunk the movie, to use a pretty bad pun here. It hindered things. The script is not great, and the two actresses are merely serviceable at best. I didn't think that they brought a lot to the table in terms of acting. They're dialed up to 11 with their emotions at all times, and it just didn't work for me. Also, one of the final attempts that is made to try and unstick the sister that is pinned, I found to be pretty hilarious, and I very much question whether or not it would work in real life. I It's somewhat of an interesting solution, but then when you really get your head around it, you're like, nah. One other thing that could have elevated this over its kind of poor scripting would be if it was just an absolutely beautiful picture. It is set in the water and underwater, and so you'd hope for that. Unfortunately, pretty much everything that we see from an underwater perspective is murky footage. It's either dark because they're down deep, or it's dirty because of the rock slide and the soot and debris and everything like floating around in the water. There are only a few really pretty shots of the top surface of the water, which is, of course, really beautiful. It's that bright blues and crisp greens. We only get to see that when Drew is surfacing. So as she's coming up to the top of the water, we'll sometimes get like a bottom up shot, like we're watching her from below. And those look really nice, but pretty much everything else is just dark. It's kind of hard to see. And there's nothing enjoyable about watching them underwater having a frantic conversation because May is stuck. She's not moving. She's not going anywhere. She's not navigating a cave. There's nothing interesting visually. It's just darkness and some rocks down there. Didn't care for that at all. And it would have been a lot more entertaining if we had some movement somehow and were able to get something interesting visually happening. So when it comes down to it, there are an awful lot of single location survival thrillers out there covering a whole number of topics and situations that people need to escape or survive. And this just happens to be one of the most bland I've ever seen. And that makes it pretty hard for me to recommend to most people. If you're still interested, however, The Dive will be in a limited theatrical release as well as on VOD on all platforms on August 25th, and you can check it out there. That's it for this episode of FF Plus. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe on your podcast app of choice. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Leave us a comment on YouTube. We like to chat. We like to check in and find out what you're enjoying, what you're not. You can find me and all of my social media links in the show notes to each and every episode as well. Feel free to follow me and let me know what you think of the movies that I review. I'd like to hear your thoughts and whether you agree or disagree. That's always a good time for me. I'll be back soon. Until then, keep watching and keep feeling film.